You're with 702 and CapeTalk. This is Early Breakfast.
A former UJ senior official has been ordered to pay, by the Labour Court rather, to repay more than 18 million rand after being found to have participated in a fraudulent private student accommodation scheme. The case involved properties accredited for more than 1,400 beds that were later found to have fewer than 300. Joining me via Zoom is the Chief Executive of the Private Student Housing Association. That's Kagisho Mamabolo. Good morning, good sir, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us.
This is a worrying story, Kagisho. I mean, 1,400 beds were supposedly available for students to take up, and therefore money was received for it, when in fact there were only 300. How often does this happen in our student accommodation sector?
Well, this is breathtaking. In fact, we've always been suspecting that such incidents do occur, but there hasn't been, real evidence. This is the first time that at least something has come out. But I think as the Private Student Housing Association, we must firstly condemn unequivocally any fraud, corruption, or manipulation of student accommodation processes. In fact, Africa, if these findings are as reported, this is not simply for us financial misconduct. I think it represents a betrayal of students, taxpayers, legitimate accommodation providers, and to some extent, the public institutions entrusted with protecting these funds. I think this is why we have always, as the Private Student Housing Association, called for a much more stronger system and a much more independent system that should ensure that not only universities or NSFAS or TVET colleges are left alone to manage these processes, but we must also resist treating this simply as a case involving one official or one provider. I think for us, the bigger public policy question is, what weaknesses in the system made this conduct of this magnitude possible?
Let's explore those, and more importantly, what is the stronger and more independent system that we need to put in place to make sure that we don't report on such a case again?
Look, you would know that there are minimum norms and standards governing student accommodation, but the practical accreditation and verification architecture remains fragmented. So depending on the institution and the funding arrangements, providers can interact with universities or can interact with NSFAS or other parties involved in the accreditation placement of students. In some instances, Africa, we've learned that even student leaders, members of the SRC and so forth, are involved in the placement of students in private residences. So what we need is a single, transparent national framework with standardized requirements for physical inspection, capacity verification, health and safety, property information, and so forth. So if you look at it, an independent organization, that is what private accommodation providers are saying that they are paying 5% towards NSFAS for this administration fee, but there are also officials that requires kickbacks. So if an independent organization is established whose sole responsibility is the accommodation, accreditation, and oversight body, we think its purpose would not only to protect the landlords, but its first responsibility must be to protect the students and the integrity of the public funding.
It does, I suppose, add a little bit more pressure and pile on the frustration and the distress that is NSFAS, right? It's been in the news for all sorts of reasons. We have news now that former board members are accused of stealing 10 laptops that are meant for schools, amongst other stories, for example. Is NSFAS still the best vehicle, do you think, to address challenges that are generally finance related when it comes to higher and tertiary education in South Africa?
Well, I think there are two separate things here. One is the subsidized higher education policy, which is known as free education. I think that policy is a correct policy. It's a policy of government, and I think it should be protected by those who have introduced it. And of course, for the beneficiaries, as we have heard, that more than 4 million beneficiaries have gone through because of that policy. But I think when you talk about the National Student Financial Aid Scheme as an organization, I think there's enough evidence that proves otherwise, that as an entity, it may no longer serve its purpose. I think its mandate is overstretched. It has lack of skills and required leadership to protect its integrity. So I think for me, NSFAS as an organization, government needs to rethink that. But I think as a policy, I think there should still be a continuous free education in this country.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Kagisho Mamabolo, the Chief Executive of Private Student Housing Association, reflecting on the story of a former senior official from the University of Johannesburg who's been ordered by the Labour Court to repay more than 18 million rand after being found to have participated in a fraudulent private student accommodation scheme. Kagisho calling for a stronger and more independent system.